Joining me now are CBS News correspondent Nikole Killion and CBS News chief congressional correspondent Nancy Cordes. Welcome to you both. And Nancy, I want to start with you. George Floyd's death has prompted lawmakers to ramp up efforts on police reform. Now, House Democrats unveiled their proposed legislation on Monday, and Republican senators met today. What exactly are Republicans considering? Do we know?
Well, Tim Scott, he's a senator from South Carolina. He's really taken the lead here. He is the only African-American Republican in the Senate, so he has led on these issues in the past. And he has already proposed legislation previously having to do with police accountability, requiring that police departments report all police shootings. And he's going further than that now, we're told. He actually laid out some elements of a plan to Senate Republicans at lunch today that included not just that police shooting legislation, but also expanding that to include all uses of force that would have to be shared nationally. And then beyond that, body camera requirements and retraining proposals. So this is still in the early phases, but we're told he wants to move quickly because House Democrats, as you pointed out, have already introduced their legislation. They want to hold a vote in the next couple of weeks. And so, interestingly, Republicans in the past 24 hours have been coming forward and saying that they actually believe that there are some areas of bipartisan agreement, and they want to get their own legislation out there, too, sooner rather than later.
Interesting, because that idea of having some sort of centralized location for these excessive force complaints is something that I know activists have talked about for a very long time. It's something that Democrats have talked about as well. Nikole, let me turn to you then. What can you tell us about a possible meeting between Republican Senator Tim Scott as well as top White House officials, including Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, Advisor Jaron Smith, and the president's son-in-law and advisor Jared Kushner?
The White House has confirmed to CBS News that all three of those individuals are meeting with the senator independently. We've also spoken with the senator's office, who has confirmed to us as well that Senator Scott's office has been in touch with the White House as they have put together this package, although his office tells us that they haven't necessarily gotten feedback as of yet from the White House. So perhaps this meeting that's happening today could possibly be in regards to that. Obviously, we'll have to report that out and see. But certainly to date, the White House has not put out any specific police reform proposals on its own. So it is notable that they are apparently talking to Senator Scott about his specific plans.
Nancy, let me ask you about a notion that we have heard surface in recent days. Some activists calling for moving to, quote unquote, defund police departments. How is that being discussed on Capitol Hill?
Well, almost all Democrats and Republicans that we have spoken to say that that is something that they oppose. The only Democrats we've really heard speaking up in favor of defunding the police or reducing funding for police departments are Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York and Rashida Tlaib of Michigan. And some Republicans have used those examples to say that this is what Democrats want to do more broadly. That is not the case. In fact, Karen Bass, who is the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, who I sat down with yesterday, said that she opposes defunding the police, but she understands where activists are coming from when they push for that. She says that there is this feeling that there's always money for police departments, there's always money for the military, and not necessarily for these communities that are hurting. So she says that she understands the sentiment, but she's not in favor of defunding the police. And several Democrats and Republican leaders have said the same thing.
And interesting, Nancy, because I read the transcript of your interview, she used the word distraction to describe this. She said she could see how this issue of, quote unquote, defunding the police could be used as a political distraction. What else did she say about that?
She said she knows that opponents of reform are going to point to that as a way to try to paint all Democrats or all proponents of policing reform as, far outside of the mainstream. She said she's just going to ignore that kind of thing because if it wasn't that, it would be something else. So she said she's got to keep her eyes on the prize. And in fact, she wants to pass her very sweeping legislation when it comes to police reform in the next couple of weeks. And that would really be quite an accelerated time frame, especially when you consider that a lot of elements of this Democratic proposal have actually been out there languishing for years. Things like a national police registry for violent police action or misconduct or a federal chokehold ban. These are proposals that have been put out there after other incidents of police misconduct in the past, and there was disagreement even within the Democratic Party. But it appears that is now shifting, and we're even starting to hear, Elaine, from some Republicans who say that they're open to things that they wouldn't have been open to in the past. One Republican, Mike Braun, a senator, told us today he's even open to examining reducing immunity for police officers, something that the party was pretty universally opposed to in the past. And so it does appear that there is a glimmer of bipartisanship here and a willingness to move forward, even in an election year, which would be pretty unusual on major legislation like this. The big question is whether Leader Mitch McConnell in the Senate is going to be willing to put really aggressive legislation on the floor. He was non-committal when reporters spoke to him today.
That is true. It does come down to that. Nevertheless, to hear a conservative like Mike Braun of Indiana express an openness at all to an idea like that would seem to be pretty striking. So Joe Biden weighed in on this issue of defunding police departments with CBS Evening News anchor and managing editor Norah O'Donnell. Let's listen to some of that.
You've seen the Black Lives Matter painted on that street just outside the White House. Some demonstrators added equals defund the police. Do you support defunding the police?
No, I don't support defunding the police. I support conditioning federal aid to police based on whether or not they meet certain basic standards of decency and honorableness and, in fact, are able to demonstrate they can protect the community and everybody in the community.
So, Nikole, what do the responses by Joe Biden and President Trump tell us about how each campaign plans to tackle these issues of racism and reforming law enforcement?
Well, I think as far as this issue of defunding the police, it goes to the definition, and I think we're going to see both sides use different definitions. In the case of Joe Biden, he clarified that he does not support defunding the police, but does believe in potentially conditioning aid on, police showing decency. On the flip side, you have the White House and the president very vocally against this notion of defunding the police. The White House saying that they're appalled at this idea and really pointing more so to what they call the radical left, pointing to, people like AOC or Congresswoman Ilhan Omar or Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, those who may believe, in fact, that the police should be defunded, as opposed to this distinction of, yes, supporting the police department, but maybe putting conditions on it, or yes, supporting the police departments, but maybe funding community organizations, which is what Congresswoman Bass has suggested. So I think it depends. I think what we'll have to watch is the language and how defunding the police is defined both by the president and by Joe Biden as this campaign moves forward. But certainly I expect it to be a very hot topic as this debate continues.
Well, Nikole, the president lashed out, as you know, on Twitter Tuesday, questioning the motives of a 75-year-old activist who was shoved to the ground by two Buffalo police officers. The president has also slammed cities whose leaders have moved to reduce funding to police departments. Is it clear, Nikole, who the president is actually trying to reach with this kind of messaging?
Well, as far as his tweet today, certainly some consider this to be a distraction of sorts, and it certainly has gotten quite a bit of attention today with the president especially suggesting that this protester in Buffalo who was pushed down by police was some type of Antifa provocateur. Really, this particular individual, according to his attorney, we have since learned is still hospitalized, and his attorney says that he's a peaceful protester and really is at a loss as to why the president would say such things about him. So as far as bringing up this Antifa reference, certainly that is something that we have seen the president do time and again as far as some of these protests and protesters are concerned, trying to imply that there is a link there, that some of these protesters are anarchists, and certainly while there may be a faction of protesters who have caused some of this disruption, again, this continues to be an issue that law enforcement continues to investigate, and as of now, we don't have any proof that this particular protester was involved with Antifa, but as far as using that language, perhaps that could be to again, gin up the president's base, but the honest truth is that we don't know, and why the president certainly would go there is certainly something that many people are questioning. Even the governor of New York with very critical words for the president. Certainly many people have seen this video of this particular protester being pushed down, and certainly many are coming out against this tweet that the president had earlier today.
So, Nancy, in the past, when there have been questionable or controversial tweets by the president, some Republicans will defend the president. I wonder now, with this particular tweet, how are Republican lawmakers reacting? Are they saying anything at all about the president's tweet?
Well, interestingly, Elaine, there was a Senate Republican lunch today on Capitol Hill, and so reporters had a chance to actually ask a lot of Senate Republicans about this completely unfounded tweet based on a bogus report from an individual who has also been employed at times by the Russian propaganda agency, Sputnik. So, this would seem to be a pretty clear-cut case where even Republicans who have stayed silent in the past or claimed in the past that they hadn't seen the tweet, that they could probably reject this one. In this case, many of them tried once again to say that they hadn't read the tweet, they hadn't heard about it. Reporters actually printed out copies of the tweet so that they could show any senators who claimed they hadn't read the tweet. In some cases, Republicans stopped and did read it. You had a couple of individuals like Lisa Murkowski who showed some disgust, said it made no sense. Mitt Romney said he wouldn't even comment on it because he thought it was so ridiculous. But most of the Republicans kind of stuck to the usual script and said that they weren't in the business of commenting on every presidential tweet, and that the president is never going to change. So what's the point? So not a lot of moral clarity on Capitol Hill today about a pretty egregious and unfounded claim that somehow this protester had thrown himself back and slammed his own head into the concrete on purpose, ending up in intensive care just so he could make the police look bad. It just made no sense.
Absolutely. All right, Nikole Killion and
I will note, Elaine, too, we're still waiting on a response from the White House on this.
Oh, a very important point, Nikole. No response yet from the White House on this, Nikole?
No, we've been reaching out all day and have not received any type of statement.
Okay, that in and of itself would appear to be a statement of sorts. Nikole Killion, Nancy Cordes, thanks to you both. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.